The city of Oakhaven breathed with a mechanical, lung-heavy rhythm. It was a metropolis of iron and asphalt, where the sky was perpetually bruised by the violet-gray smoke of 1,000 industries. At the center of the great terminal, beneath a vaulted ceiling of soot-stained glass, stood a man named Elias. To any passing eye, he was merely a ghost in a tailored suit, one of many thousands of souls moving through the corridors of the mundane. But to the wise, invisible observer, Elias was a star on the verge of collapse. He stood perfectly still, amidst the rushing tide of commuters. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, damp wool, and the metallic tang of unceasing ambition. Above him, the grand clock, a monstrous brass eye, clicked with a sound like a guillotine falling. Click, click, click. Each second was a debt being collected. For 20 years, Elias had operated under the logic of the grind. He had been taught that life was a mountain to be scaled with bleeding fingernails, that every ounce of provision had to be wrestled from the cold grip of a reluctant universe. He clutched his briefcase, the leather worn thin by the friction of his own desperate grip. His knuckles were white, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. He was holding on to a life that no longer fit him. Around him, the gray weight was visible, not as a mist, but as a heaviness in the shoulders of the workers, a dullness in their eyes, and a frantic staccato pace in their stride. They were all drinking from the same murky river, convinced that the sediment of fear was the only thing that could quench their thirst. Suddenly, the paradox of the great struggle revealed itself in a single, visceral moment of clarity. Elias watched an elderly woman struggle to catch a train that had already pulled away. She did not weep. She simply sagged, her entire being surrendering to the exhaustion of a chase that never ended. In that reflection, Elias saw the holy limit. It is the point where the soul realizes that the harder it runs, the more the horizon recedes. It is the moment when the gray weight of scarcity becomes so heavy that the heart can no longer pump the blood of hope through the veins. Elias let go of his briefcase. It hit the marble floor with a dull thud, unnoticed by the crowd, but sounding to him like a thunderclap in a silent cathedral. He had reached the edge. He was no longer willing to tolerate the old story. The threshold was beneath his feet, and for the first time in his existence, he was ready to stop trying and start becoming. Why does the human soul find itself anchored to the murky shore of not enough? Why is it that the most industrious spirits often find themselves the most depleted, standing in a desert of their own creation, while the rain falls just beyond their reach? To understand the holy limit, one must first deconstruct the architecture of the old story. For centuries, the collective consciousness has been tuned to the frequency of survival. This frequency operates on a binary logic. Effort equals reward. Scarcity is the reality. Abundance is the exception. This is the radio dial of the masses, locked onto a station that broadcasts only the music of the grind. When a soul like Elias reaches their limit, they are experiencing an ontological exhaustion. It is not that they lack the strength to continue, it is that the frequency they are broadcasting, the signal of "I must struggle to survive," has finally reached its maximum output. They have successfully created a reality of struggle so perfect and so complete that there is no room left for anything else. The recursive why. Why does the soul choose struggle? Because struggle is a form of control. If the ego can claim responsibility for its survival through hard work, it can also claim godhood over its small, impoverished kingdom. To receive without effort is a terrifying proposition to the ego, for it requires the death of the struggler identity. How does this manifest in the physical realm? Through the shadow of lack. Just as a shadow is not a thing in itself, but merely the absence of light, lack is not a tangible force. It is the absence of the frequency of provision. When one stands in the cellar of their own beliefs, they wonder why the sun does not warm them, forgetting they have built the walls and the ceiling themselves. Why is the limit holy? It is holy because it is a sanctuary of surrender. Only when the human will is utterly spent does it stop shouting at the universe long enough to hear the invisible symphony that has been playing all along. The limit is the breaking point of the old garment. It is where the seams of the scarcity blueprint finally rip apart to allow the light of the rare soul to shine through. The transition from the gray light to the gold light is not a change in circumstance, but a change in identity. As Florence Scovel Shinn whispered through the ages, man can only receive what he sees himself receiving. If the internal mirror is cracked and covered in the soot of never enough, the reflection in the physical world, the bank account, the relationships, the health will always appear distorted and diminished. To shift the reality, one must first clean the mirror of the mind. This is not a psychological trick. It is the reorganization of the very mechanical structure of the universe around a new frequency. In the ancient, half-forgotten kingdom of Orizon, there lived an alchemist named Valerius. He was renowned for his intellect and his relentless work ethic. For 40 years, Valerius had resided in a laboratory of stone and shadow, obsessed with the magnum opus, the transformation of lead into gold. His laboratory was a testament to the great struggle. It was filled with roaring furnaces, bubbling retorts, and shelves sagging under the weight of obscure grimoires. Valerius slept only 4 hours a night. He bled into his crucibles. He spent his fortune on rare minerals and expensive catalysts. He believed that if he could just find the right combination of effort, heat, and sacrifice, the universe would be forced to yield its riches. One winter evening, as a blizzard howled outside his tower, Valerius reached his holy limit. His last furnace had cracked from the heat. His last ounce of silver had been consumed by a failed experiment. He stood in the center of a cold, dark room, surrounded by piles of gray lead that refused to change. He was broken. He was finished. He sat on the floor, his back against the cold stone, and did something he had never done. He stopped. He let the fires die. He let the silence enter the room. In the absolute quiet, he noticed a single ray of moonlight piercing through a high window, landing on a piece of lead he had discarded years ago. As he watched, no longer trying to do anything, he realized that his own frantic energy, his frequency of desperate wanting, had been the very thing keeping the lead in its base state. He had been so tuned to the identity of the seeker that he could never become the possessor. Valerius closed his eyes and breathed. He imagined he was already the wealthiest man in Orizon. He didn't imagine the gold. He imagined the feeling of no longer needing to find it. He shifted his internal broadcast from the chase to the state of being chosen. When he opened his eyes, the lead had not changed into gold, not yet, but the room felt different. It felt pregnant with possibility. The next morning, a knock came at his door. A traveler, seeking shelter from the storm, offered Valerius a strange, translucent stone in exchange for a warm meal. It was the philosopher's stone, but not as the books described it. It was a catalyst that only reacted to a mind that was still. Valerius realized that the gold was never a reward for his 40 years of labor. It was a reflection of the peace he had finally found in his exhaustion. He had crossed the threshold from the world of lack to the world of overflow, not by working harder, but by reaching the limit of his own endurance and choosing a new frequency. To the one reading these words, know this. If you have found yourself in the great terminal of your own life, paralyzed by the weight of a suitcase filled with old stories, you are not being punished. You are being initiated. You have reached your holy limit because your soul is ready to shed the skin of the struggler. The shift begins with a gesture of intent. In the world of spirit, the invisible must be acknowledged by the physical. Before we move into the mechanics of the 4-8-hour activation, take a moment to pause. If you feel the truth of this message vibrating in your chest, if you recognize that your exhaustion is actually the threshold of your greatness, hit the like button now. This is not a digital vanity. It is your physical signal to the invisible currents of grace that you are done with the old station. You are signing a spiritual contract with the universe. I shift now. Today's integration. Look at your life through the lens of the two rivers. For a few moments, stop trying to fix the murky water of your current problems. Simply acknowledge that the clean river, the frequency of overflow exists, and is currently rushing past you just a few feet away. You do not need to build a bridge to it, you simply need to turn your face toward the sound of the water. Every time you feel the gray weight return today, every time a bill triggers a fear or a task, feels like a grind whisper the decree. I am rare. I am tuned to a higher frequency. Feel the resonance of those words in your throat. You are beginning to reorganize the atoms of your reality, but be warned. The mind is a creature of habit. It will try to pull you back to the great struggle because the struggle is familiar and the overflow is unknown. To navigate the crossing, you will need a map of the invisible. In the next chapter, we shall explore the invisible symphony and learn exactly how to tune your internal radio to the station of wealth. We will reveal how the air around you is currently thick with the provision you seek and why you have been deaf to the music of your own abundance. The dial is in your hand. Are you ready to turn it? The threshold is crossed. The shift has begun. High atop the jagged peaks of the Atacama, where the air is so thin it feels like a cold blade against the lungs, sits a sanctuary of silence known as the Chajnantor Observatory. Here, the world of man ends and the world of the infinite begins. Inside the control room, a young technician sits in a silence so profound it seems to have a physical weight, a velvet pressure against the eardrums. To his naked eyes, the monitor shows a flat, dark line. To his physical ears, there is nothing but the hum of his own heartbeat. Yet, outside, a phalanx of massive white discs, the radio telescopes, are tilted toward the void. They do not see light. They listen to the whispers of the cosmos. Suddenly, the technician reaches out and turns a single obsidian dial. In an instant, the silence is shattered. The speakers erupt, not with noise, but with the rhythmic, haunting pulse of a pulsar thousands of light years away. The monitor, once flat, now dances with jagged peaks of golden light. The air in the room, which had seemed empty and cold moments before, is suddenly revealed to be saturated with the invisible symphony of the universe. The paradox is staggering. The room was never empty. The music was never absent. The technician was standing in the middle of a celestial choir for hours, feeling lonely in the quiet, simply because his receiver was not yet tuned to the correct frequency. This is the state of the human soul wandering through the gray weight of life. It stands in a spiritual vacuum, shivering in the cold of not enough, weeping because it cannot see the provision it requires. It concludes that the universe is stingy, that God is silent, or that its own worthiness is in question. But the shadow of lack is a grand illusion of the senses. Like the technician before he turned the dial, the soul is immersed in a broadcast of infinite abundance that it simply cannot hear. The symphony of overflow is not being withheld, it is being ignored by a receiver locked onto the frequency of the struggle. To understand why the human spirit remains deaf to this symphony, one must apply a rigorous deconstruction of the radio dial of the subconscious mind. We must ask the first why. Why is the default setting of the human experience tuned to the station of scarcity? The answer lies in the biology of survival. For millennia, the human brain has functioned as a filter, not a window. To survive a world of physical threats, the mind learned to prioritize the shadow, the potential danger, the missing resource, the unpaid debt. This evolutionary echo creates a persistent vibration of lack. Because the mind can only process a fraction of the data surrounding it, it chooses the data that matches its internal state. The recursive logic of frequency. Why does the broadcast of abundance feel unreachable? Because the human mirror is currently reflecting the shadow instead of the source. If the internal state is one of I am trying to get, the broadcast being sent out is one of I do not have. The universe, being a perfect mechanical reflection of frequency, can only return a reality that matches the not having. How does the radio dial become locked? It is locked through the great habit of observation. Most souls believe they are reacting to their reality, but they are actually looping it. They look at a low bank balance, an observation of the past. They feel a surge of anxiety, a broadcast of lack. And that broadcast ensures that the next moment of reality must contain the same frequency. It is a closed circuit of scarcity. What is the nature of the symphony? Physically and spiritually, we exist within a field of zero-point energy. Even in the vacuum of space, there is enough latent energy in a single cubic meter to boil all the oceans of the Earth. Abundance is the natural baseline state of the cosmos. Scarcity is a localized artificial frequency created by the human radio dial. To shift, one must understand that trying is the static that prevents the music. The act of trying presupposes a distance between the seeker and the sought. But in the realm of the invisible symphony, there is no distance, only resonance. If you are not hearing the music, it is not because you haven't traveled far enough. It is because you are vibrating at a different pitch than the song. The shadow you see in your life is not a solid wall. It is merely the place where you have blocked the light of your own frequency. To move from the world of lack to the world of overflow requires a radical psychological surrender, the cessation of the struggle to hear, and the commencement of the state of being the music. In the late 19th century, on a desolate finger of rock, known as the Widow's Peak, lived a lighthouse keeper named Julian. For decades, Julian's task was simple. Keep the great wick trimmed and the oil flowing so the massive glass lens could cast a beam of safety across the treacherous shoals. One season, a strange and impenetrable fog descended, a mist of the unseen that no light could pierce. For weeks, the sun was a memory. The lighthouse beam, powerful as it was swallowed by the gray dampness only a few yards from the glass. Julian stood on the gallery, watching the gray wall of the fog, his heart cold with dread. He could hear the distant, haunting groans of ships lost in the dark, their captains weeping as they drifted toward the rocks, unable to see his light. Julian worked himself to exhaustion. He polished the brass until his fingers bled. He burned twice the oil, hoping a brighter flame would break the veil. He shouted into the mist until his voice was a ragged whisper, but the fog remained, and the shadow of failure settled over him. He felt like a rare soul abandoned by the sun. One night, a shipwrecked traveler washed ashore. He carried no lantern, only a strange wooden box with a copper wire coiled around it, one of the earliest primitive radio receivers. As Julian paced the floor, lamenting his inability to save the ships through the light, the traveler sat calmly by the fire, tinkering with the box. "Your light is a noble tool, keeper," the traveler said, his voice a calm echo in the stone room. "But the ships of this new age are no longer looking for your candle. They are listening for a different signal." The traveler threw a wire out the window and began to tap a rhythmic code into a small brass key. ... "What are you doing?" Julian cried. "There is no light in that box. The world is dark and the fog is thick." "The fog can stop a photon," the traveler replied, "but it cannot stop a frequency. While you have been agonizing over the darkness, the air around us has been filled with the voices of the captains. They are not asking for a flame. They are asking for a coordinate. They are already safe. They just don't know where they are." In that moment, Julian realized the case of the silent signal. He had been trying to fight the fog with the very tools the fog was designed to defeat. He had been broadcasting his own panic and effort, rather than the steady, invisible frequency of navigation. He stopped his frantic polishing. He sat beside the traveler and learned to listen to the invisible symphony of the radio waves. He discovered that the ships were not miles away, lost in the void. They were right there, hovering just beyond the mist, waiting for him to tune his dial to their need. The rescue didn't require more oil or harder labor. It required a shift in how he communicated with the unseen. The story of Julian is the story of every soul currently grinding their spirit into dust to solve a problem that cannot be solved at the level of the physical light. You are currently standing on your own widow's peak, staring into the fog of your debts, your loneliness, or your exhaustion. You believe you need to burn more oil, work more hours, sacrifice more joy to break through. But the invisible symphony of your provision is already vibrating in the very air you breathe. It does not need to be created, it needs to be detected. The practical integration. Today, you are tasked with becoming the technician of the dial. 3 times today, you must perform the silence audit. Enter a room and close the door. Sit in total stillness for 60 seconds. As you sit, do not think about your bills or your lack. Instead, visualize the air around you as a thick golden soup of radio waves, music, news, and the frequency of wealth. Say to yourself, "The symphony is playing. I am simply moving the dial." This is your internal pattern interruption. You are training your brain to stop reporting on the shadow and start acknowledging the source. As you begin to master this subtle tuning, you will notice a strange phenomenon. The gray weight will begin to lift, replaced by a deep, bone-level exhale. This is the signal that you have moved your receiver off the station of the great struggle. If you feel the static of your old life beginning to clear, if you can sense the first faint notes of the symphony of overflow reaching your spirit, then acknowledge this moment. Hit the like button as a physical anchor of your new alignment. And if you are ready to ensure your receiver never slips back to the old station, I invite you to subscribe. This is your commitment to the daily calibration of your soul, a vow to stay connected to the rare souls who know that the music is always playing. But tuning the dial is only the beginning. Once the music is heard, it must be embodied. The frequency must become an identity. In the next chapter, we shall descend from the peaks of the observatory and enter the great archive of the self. We will explore the architecture of identity, where you will learn that prosperity is not something you get, but something you are. You are about to discover that you have been walking through the world with a blueprint of poverty folded in your heart, and we are about to rewrite the very foundation of your existence. The symphony is calling, the dial is turning, the threshold of the identity is next. In the subterranean heart of an ancient city, where the damp scent of earth mingled with the metallic tang of history, lived a master sculptor named Kyelam. His studio was a cavern of silence, illuminated only by the flickering amber glow of oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows against walls of unhewn stone. Kyelam did not work with clay or wood. He worked with the heart of the mountain, massive, obsidian blocks of marble that seemed to swallow the light. To the uninitiated, Kyelam's process was a violent paradox. He would spend weeks simply staring at a monolithic slab, his eyes tracing invisible ley lines within the stone. When he finally struck, it was not with the frantic energy of a man trying to create something new, but with the measured precision of a man revealing something ancient. The clink of his chisel against the obsidian was the only heartbeat in the room. One evening, a young apprentice watched as Kyelam worked on a figure of a soaring hawk. The apprentice, eager to prove his industry, asked, "Master, how do you labor so tirelessly to give the stone such wings? How do you force the marble to fly?" Kyelam paused, his mallet resting against his palm. He looked at the apprentice, his eyes reflecting the amber flame. "I do not labor to give it wings," he whispered, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "I labor to remove the stone that is not a hawk. I do not force the marble to fly. I simply cease to believe it is a rock." The hawk was always there, perfect and sovereign. It was only the shadow of the stone that kept it grounded. The paradox of the hawk is the paradox of the human soul. Most spirits walk through the world believing they must build a life of abundance, layer by layer, through the sweat of their brow. They view themselves as empty vessels that must be filled. But the master architect knows a different truth. You are not a beggar trying to become a king. You are a king who has fallen asleep and dreamed he was a beggar. The architecture of identity is not about construction. It is about the radical pattern interruption of the old blueprint. It is the realization that your struggle is not a physical circumstance, but a layer of marble you have mistaken for your own skin. To deconstruct the architecture of identity, one must look into the mirror of the self and ask the most terrifying question a soul can utter. Who am I when I am not struggling? For the vast majority, the answer is a hollow silence. We have become so addicted to the echo of our own efforts that we have mistaken the noise for the music. We identify as the provider, the hustler, the survivor, or the underdog. These are not identities. They are blueprints of poverty folded into the creases of the heart. The recursive logic of identity. Why does the external reality reflect lack? Because the internal architect is working from a flawed blueprint. If the core identity is one who is trying to make it, the universe, which is a perfect mechanical mirror, must provide a reality where you are eternally trying but never arriving. To make it would be to kill the identity of the struggler, and the ego will fight to the death to keep its blueprint intact. How is the blueprint of poverty maintained? Through the radio dial of the subconscious. Every thought of "I can't afford that," every moment of envy toward another's harvest, and every echo of past failures reinforces the signal. We believe we are reporting on our lives, but we are actually commanding them. When you say, "Life is hard," you are not making an observation. You are issuing a decree to the mechanical structure of the universe to reorganize itself into a shape that proves you right. Why is prosperity a shift in identity rather than a reward for labor? Labor is a horizontal movement. Identity is a vertical shift. You can run 1,000 miles on a treadmill and never leave the room. This is labor without identity shift. But the moment you stop identifying as a struggler and start identifying as a receiver, you change the very physics of your world. The shadow of lack cannot exist in the presence of a frequency of provision. Consider the mirror once more. If you stand before a mirror with a smudge of soot on your forehead, you do not reach out to scrub the glass to remove the mark. You know that the glass is merely a reflection. Yet, in the theater of life, we spend decades scrubbing the glass trying to change our bank accounts, our bosses, or our luck while the soot remains on the forehead of our identity. The recursive why leads us to a singular conclusion. The universe does not give you what you want. It gives you what you are. If you are wanting, the universe gives you more wanting. If you are having, the universe gives you more having. This is the cold, mathematical precision of the spiritual realm. To change the mirror, you must change the architect. In the kingdom of Aethelgard, there was a legend of the lost heir, Prince Cailan. As a child, Cailan had been spirited away during a coup and raised by a band of nomadic beggars in the distant, dusty provinces of the south. He grew up in the shadow of scarcity. He learned to sleep on stone, to read the weather for signs of hardship, and to cup his hands for the copper coins of strangers. His skin was tanned by the harsh sun, and his clothes were a tapestry of filth and failure. He was, in every sense of his mind, a beggar. When he reached his 20th year, the loyalists of the old crown found him. They recognized the royal signet ring he wore on a cord around his neck, a vessel of identity he had kept but never understood. They brought him back to the capital, bathed him in oils of cedar and myrrh, and dressed him in robes of silk and gold leaf. They placed him upon the obsidian throne. But a strange thing happened. Cailan sat on the throne, but he did not rule. Every morning he would sneak out of the palace gates to the marketplace and stand in the mud, cupping his hands for coins. The merchants would bow, terrified and confused, offering him chests of gold, but Cailan would only whisper, "Just a copper, please. I am hungry." He had the frequency of wealth surrounding him, the palace, the armies, the vaults, but his radio dial was still locked onto the station of the province. He was a king in body, but his internal blueprint was still that of a beggar. He looked into the mirror of his subjects' eyes and saw not a sovereign, but a fraud. One night, the court philosopher, an old woman with eyes like polished emeralds, found him weeping in the royal gardens. "Why do you beg, Majesty?" she asked. "The kingdom is yours. The bread is yours. The very air you breathe is a decree of your own making." "I am not a king," Cailan sobbed. "I am a boy from the dust. These robes are heavy, and the throne is cold. I am waiting for the moment they realize I have nothing." The philosopher laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "You think your rags were made of cloth, Cailan. They were made of memory. You are still drinking from the murky river of your childhood because you are afraid that if you drink from the clean water, the boy you were will die. And he must. To be the king, the beggar must be executed." Kalin realized then that his struggle was a choice. He stood up, took the royal signet ring, and pressed it into the palm of his hand until it drew blood, a physical pattern interruption. He looked at his reflection in the palace fountain, and for the first time did not see the dust of the south. He saw the architecture of the sovereign. He shifted his identity, and in that instant the kingdom finally became his. The story of Kalin is the story of your life. You have been raised in the provinces of lack, and even as you read these words, your mind is whispering that you are a prince in rags. You are waiting for the merchants of the world to give you permission to be wealthy, not realizing that you are the one who owns the marketplace. To embody this truth today, you must perform an identity audit. You must look at the shadow you are currently casting and realize it is a perfect match for the blueprint you carry in your pocket. The practical integration. The mirror decree. Stand before a mirror. Do not look at your hair, your age, or the fatigue in your eyes. Look into your pupils, the vessel of the soul. The pattern interruption. Say aloud, with the authority of the obsidian throne, I am not the person who struggles. That person has reached their holy limit. I am the soul that naturally receives. The identity anchor. Throughout the day, when you face a decision, even a small one, like what to eat or how to respond to an email, ask yourself, how would the person who already has the overflow handle this? Then, do that. Act from the frequency of the finished result. If you feel the beggar within you trembling at the thought of his own execution, if you feel the rare soul beginning to claim its throne, then make your gesture of intent. Hit the like button right now. This is your physical sign to the invisible world that you are tearing up the blueprint of poverty. And if you are ready to walk the corridors of your own palace with me, subscribe. This is your oath to no longer sneak out the gates to beg for coppers when the vault is already open. But beware, an identity shifted is an identity tested. The old story does not go quietly into the night. It will try to lure you back to the murky river of your past. In the next chapter, we shall explore the tale of two rivers, where you will learn the sensory difference between the water that merely keeps you from dying and the water that gives you life. You are standing at the bank. The sound of the rushing water is getting louder. Will you drink? Or will you stay thirsty? The Valley of Dissonance stretched between two primordial mountain ranges, a landscape divided by a geography of the spirit. To the west lay the lowlands, a place of perpetual twilight where the air tasted of salt and iron. Through its center moved the first river, a sluggish, opaque vein of water known as the Stream of the Grind. It was a river of sediment, thick with the gray silt of collective anxiety and the heavy minerals of historical lack. Its surface did not reflect the sky. It only mirrored the sun as a dull copper coin, tarnished and out of reach. Along the banks of this murky river, millions knelt. They were the strugglers, their backs bowed by the gray weight of survival. They cupped their hands and drank, but the water was brackish. It did not hydrate the soul, it merely postponed the end. It was survival water, a liquid that kept the heart beating, but left the spirit parched. The paradox was haunting. The more they drank, the more exhausted they became, yet they clung to the muddy bank with a desperate, white-knuckled ferocity. They believed that if they let go of this bitter stream, there would be nothing else to quench the fire in their throats. To the east, hidden by a thin veil of mist that required a rare soul to pierce, lay the second river. It was a torrent of liquid light, rushing over stones of quartz and gold. Its sound was not a groan, but a roar of liberation, a symphony of overflow. This water was vibrant, surging with the frequency of grace. While the first river moved with the heaviness of a funeral procession, the second moved with the velocity of a lightning strike. The inhabitants of the lowlands heard the sound of the clean water in their dreams. It was the echo of a forgotten birthright. They would wake in the middle of the night, their chests aching with a hollow hunger, sensing that a different reality was only a few yards away. Yet, as the sun rose, they would return to the murky bank. They would look into the water and see the shadow of the struggler staring back, and they would tell themselves the great lie: The murky water is the only reality. The rushing sound is just the wind. They remained prisoners not of stone walls, but of a blueprint of poverty that whispered that clean water was a reward they had not yet earned. To understand the tragedy of the valley, one must apply the recursive thinking method to the psychological mechanism of attachment. We must ask the fundamental, why? Why does a soul, possessing the spark of the infinite, choose to remain at the shore of a river that is killing it? The first layer of the answer is found in the logic of the shadow. The human mind, conditioned by the radio dial of generational lack, views the murky river as predictable. Even if the water is bitter, it is consistent. To the ego, a known suffering is safer than an unknown abundance. The stream of the grind provides a false sense of agency, the belief that as long as one is cupping their hands and working for the water, they are in control. The recursive inquiry into the flow. Why is the clean river perceived as a threat? Because the clean river requires the death of the struggler identity. To drink from the second river, one must stand up, turn their back on the crowd, and walk into the mist. This is a movement of pattern interruption. The ego fears that if it stops grinding for survival, it will cease to exist. It mistakes the activity of survival for the essence of life. How does the echo of effort distort the truth? The world has taught the soul that clean water is a trophy for the victors, not a provision for the thirsty. This creates a mirror of unworthiness. When the soul hears the roar of the second river, it checks its blueprint of poverty and finds no mention of such grace. Therefore, it concludes that the sound must be an illusion or a trap. It believes it must first cleanse itself in the murky water before it is worthy of the pure, a recursive absurdity, for one cannot wash away mud with more mud. What is the bone-level exhale? It is the physiological and spiritual collapse of the old resistance. The shift begins when the soul reaches its holy limit and realizes that the gray weight is no longer sustainable. The exhale is the moment the radio dial finally clicks into the frequency of the second river. It is the realization that abundance is not a destination you reach, but a current you enter. Philosophically, the two rivers represent the two modes of human existence, striving versus being. The murky river is the realm of the doing, where everything is a transaction of sweat and fear. The clean river is the realm of the identity, where provision is a natural consequence of one's frequency. The transition from one to the other is not a physical journey of miles, it is a microscopic shift in the internal architecture of the self. It is the moment you stop asking if the water is there and start acknowledging that you are already made of the water. In the ancient annals of the kingdom of Aethelgard, the same kingdom where Prince Caelan once sat upon the obsidian throne, there is a story of the great drought of the Iron Gate. The city of Aethelgard was under siege, not by an army, but by a shifting of the earth that had choked the city's main aqueduct. The only remaining source of water was a shallow, stagnant well in the center of the slums. The water was gray, smelling of sulfur and ancient dust. For months, the citizens queued for hours to receive a single ladle of the survival water. They grew thin. Their skin took on the hue of the shadow, and their eyes became dull mirrors of despair. The king's engineers worked day and night, digging deeper into the parched earth, but they found only more dust. They were operating from the blueprint of effort, believing that if they just dug harder, the earth would yield. Among the citizens was an old blind weaver named Thal. Thal did not spend his days in the queue. Instead, he sat in the royal gardens, pressing his ear to the sun-scorched ground. While others heard the echo of their own complaints, Thal heard something else. He heard a vibration, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that felt like the heartbeat of the mountain. One afternoon, Thal walked into the throne room, his cane tapping a pattern interruption against the silent marble. "The king is looking for water in the grave of the past," Thal declared, his voice a majestic radio dial tuning the room to a new frequency. "You are digging into the murky river of the lowlands, while the clean river is already beneath your feet." The king laughed, a bitter, gray sound. "The ground is dry, weaver. Our wells are empty. There is no other river. There is a river that does not wait for the rain," Thal replied. "It is the hidden spring that fed the founders of this city before they built the aqueducts. You have forgotten it because you became enamored with your own plumbing. You have traded the frequency of flow for the logic of the pipe." Thal led the king to a neglected corner of the palace cellar, a place of holy silence where the shadows were thick. He pointed to a massive, circular stone sealed with lead. "Break the seal," Thal commanded. "Stop digging and start releasing." The soldiers shattered the lead. As the stone was moved, a sound erupted that shook the very foundations of Aethelgard. It was the roar of the second river. A column of crystal-clear water surged upward, vibrating with the gold light of provision. It was cold, sweet, and inexhaustible. The miracle was not that the water had appeared. The miracle was that it had been there for 1,000 years, flowing unseen beneath the feet of people who were dying of thirst. They had been drinking the murky water of the slums simply because they had lost the blueprint of the palace spring. The siege was over, not because the enemy had left, but because the city had remembered its true identity as a place of overflow. You are currently standing in the cellar of your own life, clutching a ladle of murky water, a job that drains you, a bank account that haunts you, or a shadow of lack that follows you like a ghost. You have been told that this is the only river. You have been told that if you want more, you must dig deeper into the dust of your own effort. But the siege of the Iron Gate is an illusion. The clean river is not a distant promise. It is a hidden spring vibrating beneath your current reality. The roar of the water is what you have been calling anxiety or restlessness. It is actually the frequency of your abundance trying to break through the lead seal of your old beliefs. The practical integration. Today, you must perform the first drink of the shift, the sensory pivot. 3 times today, find a source of running water, a faucet, a fountain, or even the sound of rain. Close your eyes and realize that this water is a physical mirror of the spiritual flow. The bone-level exhale. Take a deep breath and, as you exhale, consciously drop your shoulders. This is the physical pattern interruption for the gray weight. Say to yourself, "I release the murky stream. I turn my face toward the roar of the clean water." The gesture of intent. If you are ready to break the lead seal of your own blueprint of poverty, perform a physical act that matches the frequency of wealth. It could be as small as using the good plates you've been saving for a special occasion, or giving a small, unexpected gift. You are signaling to the universe that you no longer live in a city under siege. If you feel the hidden spring beginning to vibrate beneath your feet, if the rare soul within you is thirsty for the gold light, then anchor this moment. Hit the like button as your decree that you are done drinking from the stagnant well. And if you are ready to learn the secret story of how one woman moved from the gray exhaustion to the sacred overflow in less than 48 hours, then you must subscribe. This is your access to the archives of the alchemists. But how does one navigate the transition once the seal is broken? The water is rushing, but your hands are still cupped in the old way. To master the frequency of wealth, you must look at a specific mirror of history. In the next chapter, we shall unveil the secretary's miracle, the true case study of Donna, a woman who lived in the gray heart of the city and used a simple silver thimble to flip the radio dial of the entire universe. The mist is thinning. The river is calling. The 4-8-hour activation is about to begin. Midtown Manhattan, 1965, was a symphony of percussive industry and monochromatic exhaustion. The air was a thick tapestry of cigar smoke, roasted coffee, and the electric ozone of 1,000 telegrams vibrating through the copper veins of the city. In the labyrinthine heart of a skyscraper that seemed to scrape the very belly of heaven, Donna sat at a desk that felt like an altar to the mundane. The sound was the first thing that defined her world, the rhythmic, aggressive clatter of the IBM Selectric typewriter, a staccato heartbeat that measured the hours of her life. Clack, clack, clack. Every keystroke was a micro-investment in someone else's empire. Donna was the quintessential invisible worker, a woman whose presence was marked only by the absence of errors in her filing and the promptness of her coffee service. Her existence was a gray exhaustion, a tightrope walk across a chasm of unpaid bills and the fading echoes of a dream she could no longer name. The paradox of Donna's life was one shared by millions. She believed that the volume of her effort would eventually reach a critical mass that would explode into prosperity. She worked the longest hours. She possessed the sharpest mind in the pool. She sacrificed her weekends to the altar of the filing cabinet. Yet, the mirror of her life remained stubbornly dim. The harder she pushed, the further the horizon of enough receded. She was a master of the murky river, drinking deep of the sediment of try harder, wondering why the water only made her heavier. One Tuesday, the sky over New York turned the color of a bruised plum. A torrential downpour, a cleansing deluge, swept the streets, turning the avenues into rivers of liquid slate. To escape the rain, Donna ducked into a cramped, subterranean bookstore where the scent of vanilla and decaying paper offered a sanctuary from the storm. As she walked down an aisle devoted to the mysterious and the divine, a small, cloth-bound volume literally leaped from the shelf. It did not merely slide. It fell with a purposeful pattern interruption, landing at her feet like a gauntlet thrown by fate. She picked it up, The Game of Life and How to Play It by Florence Scovel Shinn. She opened it to a page marked by time and read a sentence that acted as a lightning strike to her soul. Man can only receive what he sees himself receiving. In that silent, dusty basement, the radio dial of Donna's consciousness began to turn. She realized with a terrifying clarity that for 10 years she had been a master architect of her own lack. She had seen herself as a struggler, and the universe had been a faithful servant, providing her with exactly what she had visualized. To understand the miracle that followed, one must perform a recursive deconstruction of the principle Donna encountered. Vision precedes provision. We must ask the first, why? Why is the internal image more powerful than the external effort? The answer lies in the mechanical structure of the universe. The physical world is not a solid, unyielding wall. It is a mirror of the consciousness that observes it. When Donna looked at her life, she saw a secretary in need. This was her core frequency. Because she identified as someone who lacked, every action she took, no matter how industrious, was a broadcast of that lack. The recursive logic of the visualized self. Why did her hard work yield no reward? Because effort is a horizontal force, while identity is a vertical one. If the identity is one who struggles, then hard work is simply the tool used to maintain the struggle. The universe does not reward the work, it reflects the worker. Donna was using the law of belief to anchor herself to the shore of not enough, believing that the anchor was actually a sail. How does the subconscious soil function? The subconscious mind does not possess the capacity for judgment, it only possesses the capacity for growth. It is deep soil. If you plant the seed of "I am tired and broke," the subconscious does not argue. It reorganizes the atoms of your reality to ensure you stay tired and broke. It provides the evidence to match the blueprint. Donna had been walking through her days with a blueprint of poverty folded in her heart, wondering why the house of her life felt so cold. Why is the 4-8-hour hold necessary? The radio dial of the human mind has a powerful elasticity. We may tune it to a new station for a moment, but the echo of our old habits tries to pull it back. To manifest a miracle, one must hold the new frequency long enough for the subconscious soil to crack the shell of the old seed. This is the point of no return. Donna's realization was the bone-level exhale. She understood that she didn't need to get money. She needed to see herself as someone who already possessed the frequency of it. Prosperity was not a destination she was traveling toward. It was a station she had not yet learned how to find. The shadow of lack was not a punishment from a stingy universe. It was a shadow cast by her own visualized identity. To change the shadow, she had to change the light. Donna decided to conduct a radical experiment, a 4-8-hour crossing. She reached into her sewing kit and withdrew a small, silver thimble. It was a humble object, tarnished and insignificant to anyone else, but to her it became a sacred vessel. It was to be her physical anchor in the world of spirit. On that Tuesday night, she held the thimble in her palms. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a decade, she did not pray for her bills to be paid. She did not beg for a raise. Instead, she whispered a decree that was a pattern interruption to her entire lineage. I am rare. I shift now. Wealth is my frequency. She spent the first 24 hours in a state of hypervigilance. Every time the echo of her old life whispered a thought of lack when she looked at her meager lunch or her worn shoes, she would touch the thimble in her pocket. It was a radio dial reset. She would instantly visualize the gold light of provision. She stopped walking like a tired secretary and began to walk like a woman of means whose wealth was simply in transit. She treated her typewriter not as a tool of drudgery, but as a creative instrument through which the universe was organizing her new reality. The 7 waves of resistance hit her almost immediately. Her logic told her she was being foolish. Her impatience screamed that nothing was changing. But she held the thimble. She stayed in the shift. On Wednesday, the 40th hour of her experiment, the holy silence descended. The office was quiet. No miracles had arrived. Her bank balance was still low. The shadow loomed large. But Donna remained in her new identity. She looked in the mirror and did not see the shadow. She saw the rare soul. At 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, the mechanical structure of the universe gave way. Her boss, a man of iron and few words, called her into his private office. Donna's old self prepared for a reprimand, but her new self touched the thimble and felt only peace. Donna, he said, his voice reflecting a sudden reorganization of his own perspective. We've been blind. You are the backbone of this operation. I'm creating a new position, executive administrator. It comes with a private office and a salary increase that is double your current rate, effective immediately. That afternoon, as she returned to her desk, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a friend who had moved to the West Coast years ago, owing Donna a significant sum of money, a debt Donna had long ago labeled as lost. The letter contained a check for the full amount plus interest. 2 sources of income. 2 gold light provisions. In less than 48 hours, Donna realized that the money was not the miracle. The shift was the miracle. The universe had no choice but to change the program once she had changed the station. The story of Donna is not a fable of the past. It is a blueprint for your future. You are currently holding the draft of your own struggle, believing that your typewriter is all there is. But the silver thimble is waiting for you. The universe is standing by, ready to reorganize itself around your new identity, but it cannot broadcast music to a receiver that is only tuned to static. The practical integration. Movement 1. Today, you are to select your vessel. Find an object. It must be small enough to carry, yet tangible enough to feel. A coin, a stone, a ring. This is no longer a thing. It is a doorway. Charge the anchor. Hold it in both hands. Perform the breath of transition. The decree. Speak the words that Donna used. I am rare. I shift now. Wealth is my frequency. Say it 3 times. Feel the vibration move from your throat into the object. If you are serious about stepping into Donna's shoes, if you are ready to witness the mechanical reorganization of your own life, then make your gesture of intent, like this chapter, as your physical signal that you have chosen your vessel. And if you are prepared to navigate the 7 waves of resistance that will surely come in the next 48 hours, then you must subscribe. This is your anchor to the frequency of overflow. The vessel is charged. The 4-8-hour clock is beginning to tick. But do not be deceived by the initial quiet. The old identity is about to fight for its life. You will encounter the waves, and you must know how to ride them. In the next chapter, we shall break down the mechanics of the shift. We will guide you through the breaths of transition and the sacred movements required to ensure that when the unexpected test arrives, you do not collapse back into the person of panic. The radio dial is in your hand. The 4 8-hour hold starts now. In the silent, frost-rimmed workshop of an ancient watchmaker, there exists a moment of absolute suspended animation. The air is thick with the scent of aged cedar and lubricating oils. Thousands of gears, some no larger than a grain of sand, hang in stasis. The watchmaker does not begin his work by striking the metal or forcing the springs. Instead, he picks up a single, polished loop, a small glass lens, and holds it to his eye. The paradox is profound. A tiny piece of glass, weighing mere grams, becomes the mechanism through which a massive, complex machine is reorganized. Without the lens, the watchmaker is blind to the subtle disharmony of the gears. With it, the invisible becomes visible, and the chaotic becomes structural. The lens does not create the watch, but it is the mechanical necessity that allows the watch to function. In the realm of the spirit, the human soul is often like that complex watch full of intricate gears and potential, yet currently jammed by the silt of lack. We have been told that to fix our lives, we must dismantle the entire machine. We believe we must rebuild our careers, our relationships, and our bank accounts from the ground up. But the master content architect knows a different path. The shift does not require a sledgehammer. It requires a vessel. Consider the object you hold in your hand: a coin, a stone, a ring. To the uninitiated, it is a trifle, a piece of matter bound by the laws of physics. But to the rare soul, it is the loop of the watchmaker. It is the physical anchor for an ethereal transformation. The inciting observation of this chapter is the realization that the universe requires a terminal point for its energy. Just as electricity requires a copper wire to travel from the storm to the light bulb, your new frequency requires a physical object to travel from the unseen realm into your current reality. The vessel is the bridge, the object is the doorway, and you are about to turn the key. To understand why a physical object is required for a spiritual shift, one must apply the recursive thinking method to the relationship between the mind and the material world. We must ask, why does the infinite require the finite to manifest? The first layer of the answer lies in the mirror of the subconscious. The subconscious mind is deep soil, fertile and unquestioning. However, it is also habit-bound. It has spent years, perhaps decades, growing the weeds of the old story. If you simply think a new thought, the echo of the old patterns will often drown it out. The mind needs a physical interrupt, a tangible piece of evidence that the radio dial has been moved. The recursive logic of the 4 movements. Why the vessel? In the world of spirit, the invisible must be made visible to be mastered. By selecting an object, you are telling the mechanical structure of the universe that you are no longer speaking in abstractions. You are grounding your intent. The object acts as a frequency storage device. It holds the vibration of your decree so that your conscious mind doesn't have to carry the weight of the shift alone. How does the breath of transition work? Breath is the radio dial of the nervous system. When you take the 3 sacred breaths, you are performing a biological pattern interruption. The first breath purges the gray smoke of the old identity. The second breath destroys the need to know how the miracle will happen. The third breath inhales the new identity. Physiologically, this shifts the brain from the beta state, the frequency of panic and calculation, to the alpha or theta state, the frequency of reception and creation. Why must the decree be spoken aloud? The voice is a creative instrument. Sound is a vibration that physically moves matter. When you speak the words, "I am rare," "I shift now," "Wealth is my frequency," you are literally charging the atoms of the object in your hands. You are sealing the frequency. The mirror of your reality cannot reflect a king if your voice is still whispering like a beggar. The decree is the sound of the seal. The 4 8-hour hold is the most critical mechanical component. The subconscious mind possesses a refractory period, a time during which it tests the new seed to see if it is authentic. Most people fail because they check the mirror too soon. They look for the gold before the shift has rooted. The 4-8-hour hold is the incubation period. It is the holy silence where the old identity is dissolved and the new one is knitted together cell by cell. In the maritime lore of the Northern Isles, there is a legend of a woman named Ilara, known as the Weaver of Currents. Ilara lived on a cliffside where the winds never ceased, and the sea was a chaotic, churning wall of gray. For generations, her family had been strugglers of the tide, barely catching enough to survive, their nets constantly torn by the shadow of the storm. One day, Ilara found a small, perfectly spherical stone on the beach, translucent as a frozen tear. She did not see it as a stone, she saw it as a sacred anchor. She had reached her holy limit of hunger and cold. She sat in the holy silence of her hut and performed the 4 movements of the shift. She held the stone, the selection. She breathed the gold light into her lungs, the breath. She spoke to the stone, her voice a radio dial, tuning the room to the frequency of the deep, calm waters, the decree. For 2 days, she did not go to the shore. She did not check her empty larder. She kept the stone in her pocket, touching it every time the echo of fear knocked on her door, the hold. On the morning of the 3rd day, the 7 waves of resistance had passed. The villagers mocked her, saying, "Ilara has gone mad, playing with pebbles while the fish flee our nets." But Ilara did not hear them. She was tuned to a different station. She walked to the cliffside and dropped her net, not with the hustle of a seeker, but with the certainty of a receiver. When she pulled the net back, it was so heavy with silver-scaled fish that the rope groaned. But the miracle was not just the fish. Inside the belly of the largest fish was a golden brooch, an ancient relic of a lost empire. The villagers stood in the mirror of her success, stunned. They asked, "What magic did you use?" "I did not use magic," Ilara replied, her voice reflecting the majesty of her new identity. "I simply stopped broadcasting the signal of the storm. I chose a vessel. I breathed the truth, and I held the frequency until the sea had no choice but to reflect it back to me. The stone didn't catch the fish. The stone reminded me that I am the one for whom the fish wait." Ilara had mastered the mechanics of the shift. She understood that the universe is a mechanical reflection of our internal state. She didn't change the sea, she changed her radio dial, and the sea reorganized itself around her. The story of Ilara is the blueprint for the next 48 hours of your life. You are not trying a ritual, you are engaging in the sacred engineering of your reality. You have reached the threshold, and now you must execute the 4 movements with the precision of the watchmaker. The practical integration. The sacred execution. Movement 1. The selection. Find your object now. It must be something you can carry. Send your piece of jewelry. Hold it. Feel its weight. Realize that this is the terminal point for your new life. Movement 2. The breath of transition. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow, deliberate breaths. Inhale possibility. Exhale the gray story. Inhale certainty. Exhale the how. Inhale your new identity. Exhale the person you used to be. Movement 3. The decree. Speak these words into the object. Let your voice be the seal. Say it 3 times. I am rare. I shift now. Wealth is my frequency. Movement 4. The 4-8-hour hold. For the next 2 days, this object never leaves you. It is your frequency reset. Every time you touch it, you are to instantly return to the gold light. If you have selected your vessel and performed the breaths, if you can feel the atoms of your rare soul beginning to vibrate at a higher pitch, then acknowledge this sacred contract. Like this chapter as your physical signal to the invisible world that the 4-8-hour clock has started. And if you are ready to stand firm when the 7 waves of resistance try to pull you back to the murky river, then you must subscribe. This is your commitment to not digging up the seed before it has cracked its shell. But you must be prepared. The next 48 hours will not be a passive wait. They will be a pilgrimage of the mind. The old identity is like a ghost that does not know it is dead. It will return with logic, with impatience, and with doubt. It will try to convince you that you are just a person with a rock in your pocket. In the next chapter, we shall explore the 7 waves of resistance. You will learn how to recognize the accountant of the past and how to ignore the urge to check. The shift is active. The hold is on. Do not look back. The dawn is exactly 48 hours away. The harbor of the old life was a place of iron-gray waters and familiar rotting piers. It was the port of the known, where the shadow of lack was a constant, predictable companion. As the vessel of the soul unties its moorings and begins the 48-hour hold, there is a deceptive moment of calm, a brief, breathless window where the water is as smooth as a polished mirror. But this stillness is not peace. It is the tension of the threshold. As the ship moves toward the open sea of provision, the horizon begins to churn. The sensory experience is jarring. The familiar scent of the harbor, the salt of old tears, and the rust of ancient effort is replaced by the sharp, ozone-rich air of the unknown. The paradox of the crossing is this. To reach the gold light of the other shore, one must first endure the storm of resistance. The very moment the rare soul declares its new frequency, the universe seems to conspire to pull it back to the murky depths. The waves do not come from the ocean itself, but from the echo of the traveler's own history. They are the psychological wake of a ship that has spent a lifetime sailing in circles. The first 3 waves, logic, the urge to check, and the ghost of memory, are not obstacles to the miracle. They are the mechanical tests of the new identity. They are the universe asking, with the cold precision of a diamond-tipped drill, are you truly a person of wealth, or are you still a prisoner wearing a crown? The ship groans under the pressure. The radio dial crackles with static. The test has begun. To navigate this crossing, the soul must deconstruct the first 3 waves of resistance using the recursive thinking method. One must look past the foam of the circumstances to find the radio dial of the cause. Wave 1. The resistance of logic, the accountant's protest. The first wave is the most sophisticated. It is the voice of reason whispering from the bridge of the mind. It points to the mirror of the bank account, the shadow of the unpaid bill, and the cold echo of the current reality. It tells the soul that holding a stone or a coin is an act of madness, a childish game in a world of hard numbers. The recursive why. Why does the brain weaponize logic against the miracle? Because the brain is an accountant of the past. It is designed to report on what has been, not what is becoming. Logic is a linear tool. The shift is a quantum leap. The brain fears the frequency of overflow because it cannot calculate its source. It believes that if it cannot see the plumbing, the water cannot exist. The reorganization. To overcome wave 1, the soul must realize that logic is not truth, it is merely a summary of the old blueprint. Intuition is the tool for the future. While the accountant counts the pennies in the hold, the architect is already visualizing the new port. Wave 2. The urge to check, the shovel of doubt. The second wave is the frantic desire for proof. The traveler wants to check the email, the balance, the mailbox. There is a hunger for a sign that the mechanical structure of the universe has indeed begun to reorganize. The recursive how. How does checking destroy the manifestation? Checking is a broadcast of absence. The moment one looks for proof, they are declaring to the subconscious soil that they do not yet have the thing. It is the act of digging up a seed to see if it is growing. The act of digging kills the growth. The reorganization. The rare soul must understand that evidence is a trailing indicator. The miracle is assembled in the unseen realm long before it breaks the surface of the physical world. To check is to reset the radio dial back to the frequency of I am waiting, which the universe must then reflect as more waiting. Wave 3. The ghost of memory, the echo of the harbor. The third wave is the sudden reappearance of the past. An old bill arrives, a person from the struggle era calls, a memory of a past failure surges up with visceral intensity. It is the shadow trying to convince the traveler that they have not actually moved. The recursive why. Why does the past return during the shift? It is a frequency check. The universe is presenting a piece of the old story to see if the traveler will still react with the old identity. If the soul responds with panic, it has reclaimed the blueprint of poverty. If it responds with the bone-level exhale of peace, the ghost is exorcised. The reorganization. These ghosts have no breath of their own. They only live if the traveler gives them air. When the past knocks, the rare soul must touch the vessel and remember. I no longer live at that frequency. In the golden age of a city whose name has been lost to the sands, there lived a master architect named Theron. Theron had been commissioned by the High Council to build the Cathedral of the Infinite, a structure that would be made of light, marble, and music. To assist him, the council assigned a chief accountant named Malachor. Malachor was a man of ink and ledger, a soul whose radio dial was perpetually tuned to the station of the bottom line. As Theron stood before an empty, dusty plot of land, he closed his eyes. He performed the breath of transition. He began to describe the towering spires, the stained glass that would turn the sun into liquid jewels, and the vaults that would echo with the symphony of the divine. He was holding the vessel of his vision. Malachor interrupted, his voice a gray weight of skepticism. Master Architect, he began, tapping a heavy ledger. Logic dictates that we have only 10,000 stones. Your vision requires 1,000,000. The math does not support the miracle. You are building a castle of air. This was the first wave. Theron did not argue. He simply touched a small, golden compass he carried in his pocket. His physical anchor. The stones are already in transit. Malachor, you are counting the stones in the yard. I am seeing the stones in the mountain. Weeks passed. The foundation was laid, but the supply of marble ran thin. Every morning, Malachor would run to the gates, shouting, "Are the wagons here? Has the marble arrived?" He would count the crates and moan when they were fewer than expected. This was the second wave. Theron remained in his study, drawing the blueprint of overflow. "Stop digging up the foundation to see if it is strong, Malachor," Theron warned. "Your checking is an echo of your fear. If you keep looking for the absence of marble, you will find exactly that." Then, a messenger arrived from Theron's home province, a ghost of memory. He brought news of an old debt Theron's father had failed to pay, threatening to seize Theron's tools. This was the third wave. The past was trying to anchor the architect to the shadow of lack. Theron looked at the messenger, and then at his golden compass. He did not panic. He spoke as a rare soul who had already crossed the threshold. "Tell the creditors that I am no longer the son of a debtor. I am the architect of the infinite. The provision for that debt is already being woven into the fabric of this cathedral." That night, Theron did not check the ledgers. He did not count the stones. He held his frequency. By dawn, a merchant caravan that had been lost in the desert for a month arrived at the gates. They carried not only the marble required, but rare pigments and gold leaf from a distant land, a gift from a king who had heard of the Cathedral of Light. The provision arrived exactly when the architect refused to collapse into the accountant. The cathedral was finished, not because Theron worked harder, but because he held the shift until the physical world had no choice but to reflect his internal blueprint. The cathedral of your life is currently under construction, and your internal accountant is likely screaming that the math does not add up. You are in the first 24 hours of your 4-8-hour hold, and the waves are beginning to crest. You must recognize them not as signs of failure, but as confirmation codes that the shift is working. The practical integration. Riding the first 3 waves. Defeating the accountant, wave 1. When your brain tells you that this is impossible or illogical, do not argue. Simply touch your vessel, your stone, coin, or ring, and say, "Logic is the accountant of my past. My intuition is the architect of my future." Silencing the shovel, wave 2. For the next 24 hours, you are under a sacred embargo. Do not check your bank balance unless it is a mechanical necessity. Do not look for signs. If the urge to check arises, take one breath of transition and whisper, "I do not check for proof. I am the proof." Exorcising the ghost. Wave 3. If a memory of lack or an old fear surfaces, visualize it as a gray mist passing through a golden gate. It cannot enter your new frequency. Say to the memory, "I recognize you, but I no longer live there." Touch your vessel and return to the feeling of the gold light. If you feel the ship of your soul groaning under the pressure of these first 3 waves, if you are ready to choose the architect over the accountant, then seal this intention. Like this chapter as your physical declaration that you will not turn the ship back to the harbor. And if you are ready to face the final 4 waves, the subtle traps of impatience, comparison, the unexpected test, and the holy silence, then you must subscribe. This is your navigation chart through the deepest part of the crossing. The first 3 waves have tested your resolve, but the sea is wide, and the most dangerous waves are the ones that come disguised as peace. In the next chapter, we shall explore the 7 waves of resistance, Part 2. You will learn why the unexpected test is actually a promotion in disguise, and why the holy silence just before the dawn is the most sacred moment of the entire shift. The 4-8-hour clock is ticking. The accountant is quiet. The sea is calling. The second night of the 4-8-hour hold descends like a curtain of heavy violet velvet. By the 40th hour, the atmosphere within the seeker's reality undergoes a subtle but profound transformation. The air no longer hums with the electric excitement of the initial decree. Instead, it becomes thick, pressurized, and unnervingly still. It is the hour of the second night, a psychological wasteland where the novelty of the ritual has evaporated, leaving only the raw, unvarnished friction between the old identity and the gold light. In a dimly lit study, a woman sits at her desk, her fingers tracing the cool, ridged surface of a silver coin, her vessel. Outside her window, the city is a blur of cold, neon, and indifferent movement. The paradox of the finish line now reveals its jagged edge. The closer the soul moves toward the breakthrough, the more the universe seems to withdraw its signs. It is as if the symphony of overflow has suddenly gone mute, leaving the traveler alone in a vacuum of silence. This is the most dangerous vantage point of the crossing. To the physical eyes, nothing has changed. The bills still sit on the counter like crouching gargoyles. The inbox remains devoid of the miraculous news. The shadow of lack grows long and distorted in the twilight of the hold. At this moment, the mind experiences a pattern interruption of a different kind, not one of inspiration, but of profound isolation. The observer notes that the seeker's breath has become shallow. The radio dial of their consciousness is trembling, hovering precariously between the new frequency and the comforting, albeit miserable, static of the old struggle. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th waves are not mere hurdles, they are vibrational gates. They do not seek to stop the traveler, but to weigh them. They ask the most piercing question of all. Is your wealth a condition of your environment? Or is it the substance of your soul? As the final hours tick away, the darkness deepens, not because the light is failing, but because the rare soul is being prepared to see in the dark. To navigate the final 4 waves, one must apply a recursive deconstruction of the ego's last stand. We must look into the mirror of the self and ask, why does the universe intensify the resistance precisely when the shift is complete in the invisible realm? Wave 4. Impatience. Fear wearing a watch. Impatience is the first of the subtle waves. It is fear in a hurry. It manifests as a frantic, buzzing irritation that the breakthrough has not yet arrived. The recursive why. Why do we feel the urge to rush the infinite? Because the ego operates in linear time, while provision operates in kairos, the appointed moment. When the soul becomes impatient, it is broadcasting the signal that the thing is absent. The radio dial slips from possession to desperation, the reorganization. To overcome impatience, the soul must realize that the universe is never late and never early. It is exact. The delay is not a denial. It is the mechanical time required for the molecules of reality to reorganize. One must treat the 48 hours not as a countdown, but as a sanctuary of certainty. Wave 5. the mirror of comparison. This wave arrives through the eyes of others. The seeker sees a peer posting about a sudden windfall or a colleague receiving the very promotion the seeker desires. The recursive how. How does envy sabotage the frequency? Envy is the mirror of exclusion. When the soul feels a pang of, why them and not me? It is decreeing that there is a limited supply of gold light. It is returning to the blueprint of poverty, where one person's gain is another's loss. The reorganization. The rare soul must reframe this immediately. If abundance is appearing in your field of vision, it is because you have successfully tuned your dial to that frequency. Their success is your preview. To bless another's harvest is to prove to the universe that you are ready for your own. Wave 6. The unexpected test, the hurdle of the brave. Just as the hold reaches its peak, a small crisis often erupts: a car repair, a minor health scare, or an unexpected expense. The recursive why. Why would the universe send a hurdle in the middle of a miracle? It is a vibration check. It is the universe asking, are you a person of wealth only when the sun is out? Or are you a person of wealth when the shadows return? If the seeker reacts with the old panic, they have failed the test. The reorganization. Respond as the wealthy version of yourself would. A person of overflow does not collapse over a broken thing. They know the replacement is already provided. The test is the promotion exam for the new lineage. Wave 7. The holy silence, the void before creation. The final wave is the most difficult. Absolute, deafening silence. No news, no signs, no money, no hurdles, just nothing. The recursive why. Why the silence? It is the pregnant pause between the word and the echo. In the mechanical structure of the universe, there is a moment where the old story has been completely cleared away, but the new reality has not yet materialized in the physical. It is the void, the reorganization. Most people give up in the silence because they mistake nothing happening for failure. But in the silence, the new reality is knitting itself together cell by cell. The silence is not an absence, it is a presence of the unmanifest. You are currently in the desert of the 7 winds. The novelty of your 4-8-hour hold has worn off, and you are likely facing one of the final 4 waves. Perhaps a bill just arrived, or perhaps you feel a nagging sense of irritation that your bank balance hasn't shifted yet. This is the moment where the rare soul is separated from the struggler. The practical integration. Passing the vibrational gates. The impatience reset. If you feel the urge to rush the universe, perform a pattern interruption. Place your hand over your heart and say, the universe is never late. I am exactly where I need to be to receive. Return to the hold. The comparison reframing. If you see someone else succeeding today, stop the mirror of envy. Say aloud, thank you, Divine, for showing me a preview of my own abundance. If it is in my field of vision, it is in my reality. The response to the test. If a broken thing happens today, a minor crisis or expense, do not collapse. Stand your ground, touch your vessel and respond with the peace of a wealthy soul. Say, this is a minor hurdle. My provision is already on its way to cover this and more. The silence embargo. If you feel the holy silence and think nothing is happening, recognize this as the void of creation. Do not go looking for signs. Stay in the frequency of the finished result. If you are standing in the silence right now, if you feel the final waves pressing against the ship of your soul, then make your final decree of the hold. Like this chapter as your signal flare to the invisible world that you are still here, still tuned, and still sovereign. And if you are ready to move past the resistance and into the realm of the sacred amplifiers, where you will learn to turn the very water you drink into a conductor of wealth, then you must subscribe. This is your final preparation for the sacred practice. The waves are behind you. The desert is shifting. The silence is about to break. In the next chapter, we shall explore the sacred amplifiers. You will learn how to use the water seal, the mirror gaze, and the gratitude loop to turn the signal of your 4-8-hour hold into a permanent, roaring broadcast of overflow. You have survived the waves. Now, it is time to command the sea. The dawn is seconds away. You are currently in the desert of the 7 winds. The novelty of your 4-8-hour hold has worn off, and you are likely facing one of the final 4 waves. Perhaps a bill just arrived, or perhaps you feel a nagging sense of irritation that your bank balance hasn't shifted yet. This is the moment where the rare soul is separated from the struggler. The practical integration. Passing the vibrational gates. The impatience. Reset. If you feel the urge to rush the universe, perform a pattern interruption. Place your hand over your heart and say, "The universe is never late. I am exactly where I need to be to receive." Return to the hold. The comparison reframing. If you see someone else succeeding today, stop the mirror of envy. Say aloud, "Thank you, Divine, for showing me a preview of my own abundance. If it is in my field of vision, it is in my reality." The response to the test. If a broken thing happens today, a minor crisis or expense, do not collapse. Stand your ground. Touch your vessel and respond with the peace of a wealthy soul. Say, "This is a minor hurdle. My provision is already on its way to cover this and more." The silence embargo. If you feel the holy silence and think nothing is happening, recognize this as the void of creation. Do not go looking for signs. Stay in the frequency of the finished result. If you are standing in the silence right now, if you feel the final waves pressing against the ship of your soul, then make your final decree of the hold. Like this chapter as your signal flare to the invisible world that you are still here, still tuned, and still sovereign. And if you are ready to move past the resistance and into the realm of the sacred amplifiers, where you will learn to turn the very water you drink into a conductor of wealth, then you must subscribe. This is your final preparation for the sacred practice. The waves are behind you. The desert is shifting. The silence is about to break. In the next chapter, we shall explore the sacred amplifiers. You will learn how to use the water seal, the mirror gaze, and the gratitude loop to turn the signal of your 4-8-hour hold into a permanent, roaring broadcast of overflow. You have survived the waves. Now, it is time to command the sea. The dawn is seconds away. In the silent, vaulted halls of the great cathedral of the mind, the air begins to shimmer with a peculiar, golden luminosity. The seeker has traveled through the valley of lack and survived the 7 waves of resistance, and now stands in that precarious, holy space between the old world and the new. The radio dial has been moved to the frequency of overflow, yet the signal is delicate, a faint melody struggling against the residual static of a lifetime of struggle. To the uninitiated, this is a moment of doubt. To the master content architect, this is the moment for sacred amplification. Imagine a high-altitude mountain lake, its surface so still it acts as a perfect mirror for the heavens. To the physical eye, the water is merely a passive recipient of the sky's light. But if one were to strike a tuning fork and touch its vibrating tines to the surface, the entire body of water would erupt in concentric, geometric patterns. The sound, once invisible and fleeting, becomes a visible, structural reality within the liquid. The water does not just hear the frequency, it becomes the frequency. It organizes its very molecular existence around the note that has been struck. The paradox of the sacred amplifiers lies in their deceptive simplicity. How can the act of drinking water, the gaze into a common mirror, or a whispered word over a currency note shift the mechanical structure of the universe? It is because these acts are not rituals of hope, but technologies of vibrational density. The universe is not a deaf machine, it is a resonant chamber. The shadow of lack only persists when the signal of abundance is too weak to penetrate the dense, gray layers of the subconscious. To strengthen the signal is to make the invisible symphony so loud that the physical world has no choice but to reflect its rhythm. The seeker is no longer merely holding the frequency, They are now turning their entire physical existence into a radio tower for the gold light. To understand the mechanics of amplification, one must apply recursive thinking to the nature of physical matter and spiritual resonance. We must ask the first why. Why does the spiritual shift require physical conductors to reach its full potency? The answer is found in the law of correspondence, the principle that the mirror of the physical world is a denser reflection of the spiritual field. The 4-8 hour hold is a period of vibrational incubation. During this time, the old story of struggle is like a dying echo in a canyon. It continues to bounce off the walls of the mind simply because of its past momentum. The amplifiers are designed to introduce a new note so powerful that it cancels out the old echo through destructive interference, while simultaneously building the new blueprint through constructive resonance. The recursive logic of the three amplifiers. The water seal. The conductor. Why water? Water is the primary radio dial of the physical body. It is a crystalline structure that holds memory and conducts frequency with near-perfect fidelity. How does it amplify? When the seeker whispers, "Wealth is my nature," into a glass of water, they are literally charging the vessel. As the water is consumed, the frequency moves from the realm of thought into the realm of biology. It enters the bloodstream, the organs, and the very cells. The identity shift is no longer a psychological concept. It becomes a physiological fact. The seeker is no longer thinking about wealth. They are flowing with it. The mirror gaze, the portal. Why the mirror? The mirror is the ultimate portal of identity. Most souls look into the mirror and see the shadow, the age, the fatigue, the evidence of the struggle. This reinforces the blueprint of poverty. How does it amplify? By looking past the surface and into the pupils, the vessel of the soul, and declaring, "I see you, rare soul," the seeker performs a pattern interruption of the highest order. They are witnessing the gold light before it has fully manifested. This act of divine recognition bridges the gap between the current self and the infinite self. It forces the subconscious to accept the new frequency as the only valid reality. The gratitude loop, the circulation. Why the loop? Money is not a solid object, it is a river. The greatest error of the struggler is the attempt to dam the river through fear and hoarding. How does it amplify? Every time currency leaves the seeker's hand, the gratitude loop ensures the signal remains one of overflow. By saying, "Thank you for this circulation," the seeker identifies not as a spender, one who loses, but as a distributor, one who facilitates flow. This keeps the radio dial locked on the station of more, where this came from, ensuring that for every drop that leaves the reservoir, 1,000 streams are commanded to return. The recursive how reveals that these amplifiers work by removing the resistance of density. They take the ethereal decree and weave it into the fabric of the mundane. When the mundane becomes sacred, the mechanical structure of the universe recognizes that the shift is no longer a temporary experiment, but a permanent reorganization of the soul's architecture. In the ancient, sun-drenched city of Aurelia, there was a square where a fountain of tarnished lead stood. For generations, the citizens believed the water was bitter and scarce. They would approach the fountain with gray faces, bickering over every drop, their radio dials tuned to the frequency of not enough. Consequently, the fountain barely trickled, its waters clogged by the silt of anxiety. Among them lived a woman named Seraphina, who was known as a rare soul. Seraphina did not believe in the bitterness of the water. She reached her holy limit of watching her neighbors wither in the shadow of lack. She decided to become the architect of the flow. Every morning, Seraphina went to the fountain. She did not bring a bucket to take, she brought a vessel of clear crystal. Before she drank, she would hold the crystal to the sun and whisper into the water, "The source is infinite. This water is gold." This was her water seal. Within weeks, those who watched her noticed that her skin began to glow with a luminosity that the others lacked. She was no longer drinking survival, she was drinking provision. Next, Seraphina placed a polished silver plate behind the fountain, creating a mirror. Whenever she felt the echo of the city's fear, she would look at her reflection in the silver and the water. She would ignore the rags of her current circumstance and look deep into her own eyes until she saw the princess of the springs. "I see you, rare soul," she would decree. This was her mirror gaze. The more she recognized her true identity, the more the fountain seemed to respond, its trickle growing into a steady stream. Finally, whenever Serafina had a single copper coin, she would not hide it in a cellar of fear. She would toss it into the fountain's basin with a laugh, saying, "Thank you for the circulation. Let this return to the city tenfold." This was her gratitude loop. The other citizens thought she was mad to waste her substance, but a strange mechanical reorganization began to occur. The copper coins seemed to act as anchors for wealth. Travelers began to stop at the fountain, throwing their own gold and silver into the water. The lead pipes, once clogged by silt, began to clear, revealing that they were actually made of solid silver beneath the tarnish. The fountain became the roaring river of Aurelia's prosperity. The miracle was not that Serafina had created water from nothing. The miracle was that she had used the amplifiers of her own frequency to clear the pipes of the city's collective belief. She had turned the static of scarcity into the symphony of overflow, and the universe had no choice but to provide the music. The fountain of Aurelia is your own life, and the pipes are currently being cleared. You are in the final stages of your 4-8-hour crossing. The sacred amplifiers are the tools you will use to ensure the gold light becomes your permanent environment. The practical integration. Activating the amplifiers. The water seal. For the remainder of your 4-8-hour hold, never take a sip of any liquid without first holding the glass in both hands. Close your eyes for 3 seconds and whisper, "Wealth is my nature. I drink the overflow." Feel the vibration enter the water. As you swallow, visualize the frequency of grace saturating every cell of your body. The mirror gaze. Once every morning and once every night, stand before a mirror. Silence the accountant who wants to look at your flaws. Look directly into your own pupils, the radio dial of your soul, and say with majestic authority, "I see you, rare soul." The shift is complete. Provision is your shadow. Hold the gaze until you feel a bone-level exhale. The gratitude loop. Today, every time you exchange money, whether paying a bill, buying a coffee, or tipping a server, do not let the shadow of lack touch the transaction. As the money leaves your hand or your digital account, say mentally, "Thank you, Divine, for this circulation. More is on its way." Feel yourself as the river, not the dam. If you are ready to turn your entire physical being into a radio tower for the infinite, if you can feel the silver pipes of your life beginning to roar with clean water, then anchor this intention now. Like this chapter as your physical seal of amplification. This is your declaration that you are no longer just thinking about the shift, but conducting it. And if you are ready for the final seal, the word of power that locks this transformation into place so that it can never be undone, then you must subscribe. This is your final invitation to the throne room of the decree. You have tuned the dial. You have survived the waves. You have amplified the signal. There is only one thing left to do. The 4-8-hour hold is nearing its conclusion. The dawn is breaking over the other river. It is time to speak the words that cannot be unspoken. It is time to finalize the sacred contract. The final seal awaits. The universe is holding its breath. The 48th hour does not arrive with the blare of trumpets or the sudden shattering of the sky. It arrives in the deepest marrow of the silence, a quiet, so absolute it feels as though the universe itself has held its breath to witness a birth. In the soft, pre-dawn light of the second morning, the seeker stands at the center of their own life, the vessel still clutched in a hand that no longer trembles. The air in the room has changed. It no longer carries the humid, too heavy scent of the chase. Instead, it is cool, thin, and charged with the metallic tang of a thunderstorm that has already passed. The inciting observation of this final movement is a challenging paradox. The miracle is not that something has arrived, but that the person who was looking for it has disappeared. Imagine a massive, ancient vault door, wrought from the iron of ancestral struggle and the lead of personal failure. For generations, the Seeker's lineage has stood before this door, pounding their fists against the metal, screaming for entry, and weeping at the shadow of the locked gate. They believed that the harder they pounded, the more likely the door was to open. But as the clock strikes the final minute of the hold, the Seeker realizes that the door was never locked from the outside. It was held shut by the very pressure of their own desperate wanting. To finalize the shift is to step back from the door. It is the realization that the radio dial is no longer being turned. It has found the station. The music is playing. The mirror is no longer reflecting a seeker. It is reflecting a sovereign. The paradox of the final seal is that one must cease all labor to claim the harvest. The gray weight of the old identity is not something one fixes, it is something one finishes. In this cinematic stillness, the seeker understands that they are not just changing their bank account or their career, they are closing the book on 1,000 years of scarcity. They are the rare soul who has finally learned that the most powerful word in the creative lexicon is not please, but done. To understand the mechanical necessity of the final seal, we must apply the recursive thinking method to the concept of completion. We must ask, why is the declaration of "it is finished" the ultimate catalyst for physical manifestation? The answer lies in the mechanical structure of the universe as a perfect, non-judgmental feedback loop. The universe does not respond to what we want, for wanting is a frequency of absence. It responds only to what we are. As long as a soul is in the state of trying to shift, the universe must provide a reality of trying. To manifest the gold light, one must move from the process of becoming to the state of being. The recursive logic of the seal. Why must the shift be locked? The human subconscious is like deep soil that possesses a powerful memory of the old seeds. Even after 48 hours of holding a new frequency, the echo of the old identity, the accountant of the past, will attempt to re-enter the field. It will look for any crack in the armor of certainty. The final seal acts as a spiritual deadbolt. It tells the subconscious that the refractory period is over. There is no longer a path back to the murky river. By declaring it finished, the seeker severs the timeline of lack. How does the decree "it is finished" reorganize reality? In the realm of quantum potentiality, all possibilities exist simultaneously. However, they remain in a state of waveform until an observer collapses them into a particle through the power of conviction. When the seeker speaks the final seal, they are performing the ultimate act of observation. They are telling the invisible currents of grace that the search is over. This forces the mechanical structure to stop rearranging possibilities and start solidifying the one that matches the decree. Why does this affect the new lineage? Identity is an inheritance. Most souls inherit a blueprint of poverty passed down through the echoes of their ancestors' fears. When a rare soul completes the shift and seals it, they are not just acting for themselves. They are performing a correction in the ancestral record. By declaring "it is finished," they stop the transmission of the scarcity signal to the generations that follow. They become the point of origin for a new broadcast of overflow. The recursive why leads us to the throne room of the spoken word. The voice is the bridge between the unseen realm and the physical plane. To seal the shift is to use the voice as a creative hammer, driving the final nail into the coffin of the struggler. It is the moment where the radio dial is not just tuned, but welded into place. In a city built of white marble and sapphire glass, there lived an old man known as the archivist. He dwelt in the Tower of Lineages, a place where the history of every family was preserved as a single, long thread. For centuries, the archivist had watched the threads of the common citizens. They were almost universally made of gray wool, coarse, heavy, and knotted with the shadows of debt and exhaustion. One day, a young woman named Arya came to the tower. She was a rare soul who had reached her holy limit. Her family's thread was a mess of gray tangles, a record of 100 years of drinking from the murky river. "I am done weaving the gray," Arya declared, her voice a pattern interruption in the dusty silence of the tower. The archivist looked at her through spectacles of polished crystal. To stop weaving the gray, you must do more than find gold thread, child. You must seal the end of the old one. If you do not seal it, the gray will always bleed into the gold. Arya took her family's gray thread, and for 48 hours she sat in the holy silence of the tower's peak. She held a small silver spindle, her vessel. She performed the breaths of transition. She ignored the waves of resistance that whispered she was destroying her heritage. On the dawn of the second day, she stood up. She took a pair of sacred shears and snipped the gray thread. But she did not stop there. She held the frayed end of the old life and the beginning of a new, shimmering gold thread in her hands. She did not pray for them to join, she decreed it. "It is finished," she whispered. The gray thread turned to ash and blew away in the wind. "It is done," she said with her full voice. The air in the tower began to vibrate with the symphony of overflow. "And it cannot be otherwise," she shouted to the horizon. In that moment, the mechanical structure of the tower reorganized. Arya's name on the archive was rewritten in gold light. But the miracle went deeper. As she looked back at the threads of her yet unborn children and her living parents, she saw that they, too, had turned from gray to gold. By sealing her own shift, she had changed the frequency of the lineage. The shadow of lack could no longer find a purchase on her family tree, for the blueprint had been fundamentally altered. Arya walked out of the tower, not as a girl trying to change her life, but as the architect of a new world. She didn't need to check the thread again. She knew it was finished. The Tower of Lineages is your own mind, and the sacred shears are in your hand. Your 8-hour pilgrimage is coming to its end. You have moved the dial. You have stood firm against the waves, and you have amplified the signal. Now, it is time for the final seal. You are about to speak the words that will lock the gold light into your reality forever. The practical integration. The threefold decree. Find your quiet place. Hold your vessel, your object, in both hands. Stand if you are able, for the sovereign does not sit while issuing a decree. The first seal, the whisper. Close your eyes. Feel the vibration of the last 48 hours gathered in your heart. Whisper, "It is finished, it is done, and it cannot be otherwise." Let the words travel from your soul into the object. Feel the door of the old life clicking shut. The second seal, the voice. Speak with absolute authority, as if you are commanding the very atoms of the room. It is finished, it is done, and it cannot be otherwise. You are not asking for permission, you are reporting a fact. The mirror of your life has no choice but to reflect this. The third seal, the decree. Lift your vessel toward the light. With every ounce of your rare soul, declare it to the universe. It is finished, it is done, and it cannot be otherwise. The release. Once the words are spoken, place your vessel down. Do not touch it for an hour. This is the act of complete surrender. You are signaling to the universe that the work is over. You are no longer the weaver, you are the witness. If you have spoken the seal, if you can feel the gold light of your new lineage vibrating in your bones, then make your final declaration here. Subscribe to this frequency as your vow to never return to the murky river, and in 48 hours, when the physical evidence has arrived in your world, come back to these comments and type your testimony. Your success is the breadcrumb that will lead the next rare soul out of the gray weight. The threshold is behind you. The radio dial is welded. The architecture of your identity is sovereign. You began this journey as a soul at the limit of endurance. You finish it as a soul in the center of overflow. The shift is complete. The gold light is your nature. And so it is.